Today, we're tackling a really broad and honestly pretty important set of ideas.
Yeah, it's all about how we look at technology, isn't it?
Exactly. How we evaluate it, how we decide what's okay, what's maybe not okay, and how we try to keep it all under some kind of control.
Right.
We've pulled together some material from learning module slides, and they dig into, well, quite a range. Everything from weapons that can operate on their own
Which is pretty intense stuff.
to, social media, online education, the things we interact with daily.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission here is really to try and cut through some of that complexity
Yeah, give you a clear path, a shortcut maybe, to understanding the key issues.
because it's easy to get bogged down.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating just how wide that term technology is in this context.
It really is.
It's not just our phones or laptops, right? We're talking about systems, systems that can make critical decisions without immediate human input.
Platforms that shape society.
The tools we use for learning, for connecting, it all falls under this umbrella.
Which highlights why we need to think so carefully about it all.
Exactly.
And I have to say, there are some genuinely surprising angles in this material.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, things that might make you reconsider some common assumptions about the good and, well, the bad of tech.
Okay, intriguing.
So we're kicking things off with something that honestly feels a bit sci-fi, but it's becoming very real. Lethal autonomous weapons systems. LAWs, right. Okay, so to get our heads around this, the slides helpfully break these systems down into a few categories.
That is useful.
First up, you've got human-in-the-loop weapons.
Okay.
Think of these like robots that need a human operator to explicitly say, okay, engage that target.
Oh.
The human makes the final call.
Got it. Button pusher.
Sort of, yeah. Then there's human on the loop.
Yeah.
Here, the system, the robot, can select targets and engage them, but a human is supervising.
Supervising. So they can step in.
Exactly. They monitor and can override the machine if necessary.
And then you get to the really complex one. Human out of the loop.
Right, this is the one that sounds different.
It is. These are weapons that can potentially identify targets and use lethal force all on their own. No human involvement needed at that specific moment of decision.
Wow. Okay. No human involvement. That definitely has an unsettling ring to it.
It does.
But, the slides also point out that we already have technologies out there with autonomous features. Maybe not fully out of the loop in the same way, but
Like what?
well, landmines are a grim sort of low-tech example. Once placed, they act autonomously.
True. Tragically so.
Then you've got much more sophisticated things, like Israel's Iron Dome system.
Ah, yes. Intercepting rockets.
Right, it automatically tracks and intercepts short-range rockets and artillery, targeting populated areas. It makes those decisions fast.
And the U.S. Navy's AGWAS system.
Yeah, that can apparently engage planes and missiles autonomously in certain defensive modes.
Okay.
And there's an Israeli drone mentioned, the Harpy, that patrols, looking for specific radar signals.
And when it finds one.
It automatically dive bombs the source. So you see, elements of this automation in warfare, they're not just theoretical. They exist now.
That's a really important point. It's not some distant future scenario entirely. But what's, maybe counterintuitive are some of the arguments for these fully autonomous systems.
Arguments for them, like what?
Well, the slides suggest one idea is they might actually lead to fewer civilian deaths.
Fewer.
How? The thinking is they could act more conservatively, more precisely. Maybe without the panic or stress a human might feel in combat.
No self-preservation instinct either, right?
Exactly. They wouldn't hesitate to undertake a risky mission if programmed to. Plus, think about sensors. Their perception could be far superior to human sight or hearing.
Better situational awareness, maybe.
Potentially, yes. And crucially, no emotions like anger, fear, fatigue, things that can lead to terrible mistakes in warfare.
That point about emotions is, wow, it's striking. You think about the heat of battle. A machine isn't going to act out of pure frustration, is it?
Or fall into that psychological trap the slides mention, scenario fulfillment, seeing what you expect or want to see, even if it's not quite right.
Which humans definitely do.
Absolutely. So the argument goes, a machine could process vast amounts of information faster, maybe even monitor its own actions against ethical rules more consistently than a person under pressure.
That's a challenging idea to grapple with. But surely there are huge concerns.
Oh, massive concerns. And the slides bring them up clearly. One major one involves something called the Martens Clause.
Okay, what's that?
It's a long-standing principle in international law. Basically, it says that even where there aren't specific treaty rules, conduct in war must still follow the principles of humanity and the dictates of public conscience.
And the question is, can a machine do that?
Yeah.
Can an algorithm understand humanity or conscience?
Precisely. It's a fundamental ethical question. And then there's the very practical fear of sparking a new, maybe very unstable arms race.
If one country develops them, others feel they have to.
Yeah.
You can see that happening.
And perhaps the knottiest problem of all, accountability.
Right. If one of these human out-of-the-loop systems makes a mistake, targets the wrong thing, causes civilian deaths, who is legally responsible?
Is it the programmer who wrote the targeting algorithm?
Or the company that built the machine?
The military commander who decided to deploy it?
Maybe the operator who was overseeing it, even if they didn't give the final order?
Our current legal frameworks well, they don't have clear answers for that, and that lack of accountability is deeply, deeply troubling for many people.
It feels like a huge gap.
It is, and this ties into the politics of it all, too.
How so?
Well, the slides mention a UN meeting where attempts to create a ban on these so-called killer robots were blocked.
Blocked by who?
Primarily the US and Russia, according to the material. And it also notes that countries like Australia, Israel, South Korea, and the US have all indicated they see potential strategic advantages in these systems.
So there's active interest in developing them, despite the concerns.
Definitely. It shows a real split in how different nations are viewing this technology and its future role.
Okay, so that's the high-stakes world of laws. Let's shift gears quite dramatically now.
Okay.
Let's look at a different kind of critique of technology. The views often associated with neo-Luddites focused more on digital technologies in everyday life.
Right, and the term Luddite often gets used dismissively, like someone who just hates all tech.
Yeah, just anti-progress.
But the slides show their arguments are actually more specific and, well, more complex than that simple caricature.
So what are their main points?
Well, a big one is job displacement technology, eliminating jobs, and also de-skilling, where the jobs that remain require less expertise or craft.
Okay, makes sense.
They also argue that tech often manufactures needs we didn't have before, rather than just solving existing problems. Think about the constant upgrade cycle.
Yeah.
And there are big concerns about increasing social inequality, social disintegration, even a kind of dehumanization.
How so? Dehumanization.
Maybe through automated interactions, less face-to-face contact, that kind of thing. They also point to weakened communities, more isolation, a separation from the natural world.
Environmental harm comes up too, right?
Yes, definitely. And the idea that new technologies often disproportionately benefit big corporations or governments, not necessarily the average person.
That's a lot of criticism packed in there.
It is. There's also concern about hindering social and intellectual development, especially in children, and a general skepticism that technology actually does much to solve fundamental human problems like poverty or injustice.
The slides also seem to contrast two views on the purpose of technology itself.
That's right. There's the view attributed to the Luddite perspective, that tech's main goal is often just cutting costs by getting rid of workers.
Leading to mass unemployment, lower quality of life for many.
Exactly, with maybe only a few at the very top reaping the benefits.
And the contrasting view.
The sort of non-Luddite view, as the slides frame it, sees technology's purpose more optimistically reducing the effort needed for production.
Which, in theory, leads to more overall wealth, better living standards for everyone eventually.
That's the argument, yes. Two quite different ways of looking at the same phenomenon.
And this feeds into that really big question the Luddites seem to pose. Has all this tech actually made our lives significantly better overall?
Yeah, they'd argue perhaps not, or at least that the benefits are overstated and the costs ignored.
Which leads to this idea of evaluating tech differently, more human-centered.
Exactly. Asking questions like, does this technology truly meet a genuine human need? How well does it do it? What are all the costs, not just money, but social costs, environmental costs, psychological costs?
And importantly, how does it stack up against alternatives? Are there non-tech or lower-tech ways to achieve the same goal?
Right. It's a framework for critical assessment, not just blind acceptance.
And this is where that idea about manufactured needs comes back in, isn't it? Does technology sometimes create its own necessity?
The payphone example in the slides is perfect for this.
Yeah, I like that one.
Before mobile phones were ubiquitous, payphones were everywhere, essential infrastructure. Now, they're almost extinct.
Because everyone needs a mobile phone.
Exactly. It went from a convenience, maybe a luxury, to something that feels almost non-negotiable for participating in society. Did we all consciously choose that? Or did the technology itself reshape our needs?
It really makes you think. It's not just about whether you want the latest gadget anymore.
Sometimes it feels like you have to have it just to function.
Another, maybe more mundane example of control they mention is speed limiters on trucks.
Yeah, the debate about mandatory limiters setting top speeds somewhere around, 60, 68 mile per hour?
Right. It takes that abstract idea of controlling technology and makes it very concrete. You've got safety arguments, fuel efficiency.
But also pushback about driver autonomy, delivery times, the logistics of trucking. It shows how even seemingly simple tech controls involve trade-offs.
Okay, let's pivot slightly and look at some other specific examples the slides use for evaluating tech. The digital divide comes up.
Yes, but not just access, right? It's about how people use the internet.
Exactly. The difference between being a passive consumer of content versus an active creator.
And the slides suggest that content creation, online blogging, making videos, coding, whatever is empowering, gives people a voice.
There's a catch.
Yeah, the observation is that content creators tend to be, on average, more educated, which points to a continuing socioeconomic gap just manifesting in a new way.
That's interesting. You compare that to pre-internet. I mean, getting your voice heard then, writing a book, or getting on TV, the barriers were arguably even higher for most people.
True. It's complex. Another quite specific example, speech synthesis.
Like computer voices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a philosopher cited who, even a decade ago, worried about it.
Worried why?
The concern was about deception. If machine voices become indistinguishable from human ones, could it erode trust or make it harder to know who or what you're really interacting with?
I can see that, even though the benefits, like for accessibility, are huge.
Absolutely. Benefits and potential downsides often go hand in hand. Same with speaker recognition software.
Voice ID, basically.
Right. The slides note its potential for things like security, my voice is my password, or maybe personalized services,
But the flip side,
surveillance, privacy violations. If systems are constantly listening and identifying who is speaking, that raises obvious concern.
it forces you to weigh those things.
But yeah.
Which leads to that fundamental question the slides keep coming back to. Who benefits most?
Yes. That's crucial for evaluation. They use a stark example, a new cancer drug.
Okay.
It extends patients' lives, which is clearly a huge benefit to them, but it might also generate enormous profits for the pharmaceutical company. So who is the primary beneficiary? How do we balance those interests?
And applying that to something like social media.
Right. Who benefits most there? Governments gathering data, businesses advertising or selling products, or is it really the ordinary users connecting with friends?
And why does that balance or imbalance matter?
That's the critical question you need to ask. Understanding those power dynamics is key.
The slides also bring up something maybe less obvious. The decline of languages.
Yeah, the impact of globalization and technology favoring dominant languages, usually English online.
So having a common language might seem efficient.
Sure, potential advantages in communication, but the downside is the loss of cultural diversity, unique ways of thinking embedded in different languages. Is that a significant problem? The slides leave it open.
A matter of perspective, maybe.
Probably. And finally, in the section, online education, super relevant right now.
Definitely.
The slides push us to consider the pros and cons for students, for society. Is an online degree truly equivalent in value to a traditional in-person one?
A debate that's still very much alive.
And has huge implications for the future of learning, accreditation, jobs.
Okay, so all these examples, all these ways technology impacts us, it really underscores the need for good judgment, doesn't it? Evaluating information responsibly.
Absolutely. And the digital age makes that harder in some ways. The slides ask that question. Experts or the wisdom of the crowd.
Because we're just flooded with information online. And let's be honest, a lot of it is wrong.
Or misleading, yeah. And search engines, which are our main gateway now, replacing the librarian for many.
They rank by popularity, algorithms, clicks, not necessarily by factual accuracy or expertise.
Right, which brings in this idea of the wisdom of the crowd, the theory that if you average out enough opinions, you get close to the truth.
But does that hold up online?
Well, the slides immediately counter that with a really disturbing example, the Slender Man case.
Oh, right.
It was awful.
Yeah, the story of those two young girls who allegedly acted violently based on a fictional internet horror character. It's a tragic illustration of how potent misinformation can be, especially for vulnerable people like kids.
It shows the real-world consequences aren't trivial.
Not at all. And it highlights that while the internet provides access, it also amplifies the spread of the unreliable, the false, the just plain weird.
And as the slides note, bad information isn't new, obviously. Propaganda, rumors, they've always existed.
But the speed and reach online are different. Plus, things like online rating systems, easily manipulated, fake reviews, bots.
Yeah, you can't always trust the 5 stars.
Definitely not. The slides do mention platforms like Wikipedia or Twitch.tv as interesting cases, though.
How so?
Well, Wikipedia is crowdsourced, written by volunteers, subject to bias, sure. But often, the people contributing do have expertise in their areas. It's a mixed bag, but can be incredibly useful.
And Twitch, that's mostly gaming, isn't it?
Mostly. But it also has communities built around skills, learning, shared knowledge. So the crowd isn't monolithic. It depends on the platform and the community.
There's also that fascinating My Football Club experiment mentioned.
Ah, yeah, the attempt to run a soccer team purely by fan votes online.
How did that turn out?
According to the slides, sort of, middle of the pack. Not a disaster, not a roaring success. A real-world test of collective decision-making, I suppose.
So it suggests the wisdom of the crowd is maybe average.
Perhaps. Which leads back to the core concern. Can ordinary people reliably sort good information from bad online?
And the potential danger if they can't believing lies, following harmful advice.
It feels like a serious problem. The slides ask if it's fundamentally new or just an old problem scaled up.
What about solutions? Does the material suggest anything?
One idea discussed is requiring search engines, Google, Bing, etc., to make their ranking algorithms public.
With transparency so we know why we're seeing certain results.
Exactly. Arguments for that are accountability, maybe helping users judge credibility,
But the counter-arguments.
probably protecting trade secrets, the complexity of the algorithms, and the risk that people would just focus on gaming the system even more if they knew the rules.
Yeah, tricky. What about social media sites themselves? Do they have obligations?
The slides raise that specifically regarding buying and selling votes or likes for news stories to manipulate visibility.
Is stopping that just good business, or is it an ethical duty?
That's the question posed. Given their influence on public discourse, maybe it's more than just policy.
And there's a final point in this section about how the web might actually narrow our views.
Yeah, the echo chamber effect. Critics argue that personalization and social networks make it easy to only see opinions you already agree with.
Avoiding diverse viewpoints.
Right. Which can reinforce biases, maybe even accelerate political polarization because you're not challenged by different perspectives. Consensus forms quickly within the bubble, but the bubble itself might be limited.
That feels very relevant today.
It does. And there's a related warning, the danger of abdicating responsibility.
Meaning?
Relying so much on computers for answers, for analysis, for even simple thinking tasks, that we lose confidence in our own judgment. Maybe become afraid to defend our own conclusions if a computer disagrees.
A kind of intellectual outsourcing?
Something like that, yeah, a cautionary note.
Okay, shifting again. Let's talk about models and prediction. Evaluating forecasts, especially for technology.
Right. Because so much policy and investment relies on models. The slides suggest some key questions to ask whenever you encounter one.
Such as?
First, how well do the model creators actually understand the underlying science or system they're trying to model? Is the knowledge solid?
Makes sense. What else?
What assumptions are built in? What simplifications have been made? Because all models simplify reality to some extent.
You need to know what's been left out.
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, how well did the model's predictions actually match up with real-world results when you test it? Does it have a track record?
Validation is key.
Absolutely. And the slides list several reasons why models might just be wrong.
Like what?
Well, our basic knowledge might be incomplete. We just don't understand the system perfectly.
Or the data we feed in could be bad.
Inaccurate or insufficient data, yeah. Computing power could be a limitation for really complex systems.
And maybe the biggest challenge.
Quantifying things that are hard to quantify. Especially human behavior, human values, societal choices. How do you put reliable numbers on those?
Very difficult, if not impossible sometimes.
Pretty much. And this difficulty is reflected in the history of tech predictions.
Which are often wrong.
Famously so. The slides mention that the history of technology is littered with predictions that were wildly off base, both overly optimistic and overly pessimistic.
Like the early arguments against speech recognition that were mentioned seemed pointless to some then, ubiquitous now.
Exactly. We're just not very good at foreseeing all the uses and impacts.
Costs and benefits are often misjudged too, right?
Yes. New tech often starts out incredibly expensive, accessible only to a few.
But then costs drop.
Right. As it improves, as demand grows, economies of scale kick in. Think early computers versus the smartphone in your pocket.
Big difference. This all leads to a really fundamental dilemma, doesn't it? Potential abuse versus potential benefits.
Yes. The slides ask, should we reject a technology only because it could be misused, even if it offers huge potential good?
Where do you draw the line? It's a constant tension in technological development.
It really is. Which then broadens out into huge societal questions.
Like, can we actually pick and choose? Can society say, yes, we want this medical technology, but no, we absolutely forbid that weapons technology?
Or, we like this aspect of AI, but not that one. Is that kind of selective adoption feasible?
And if it is, who decides? Who gets to make those calls for everyone?
Governments, international bodies, scientists, the public. It's incredibly complex with no easy answers provided, just the questions raised.
Which seems like a fitting lead-in to the final and perhaps most mind-bending topic, the singularity.
Ah, the singularity. Yeah, that's definitely out there.
So the definition first, what are we talking about?
It's that hypothetical future point where artificial intelligence, or maybe some kind of human-machine fusion, advances so rapidly and profoundly that it just surpasses human understanding altogether.
Beyond our comprehension.
Essentially, yes, a point of runaway intelligence growth.
And the potential outcomes presented are stark.
Extremely. On one hand, maybe you get super intelligent machines, maybe biologically enhanced super intelligent humans.
Yep.
Unimaginable progress.
Yeah.
Or, the more alarming possibility, it could somehow lead to the obsolescence or even the end of the human race as we know it.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Can we even prepare for something like that?
Well, the slides are pretty blunt. Probably not directly. It's inherently unpredictable because it's beyond our current understanding.
So don't worry about the specifics of the post-singularity world.
The suggestion is maybe focus more on the gradual developments leading up to it. Try to manage the path rather than predict the destination precisely.
Which brings us back to decisions we make now.
Exactly. And the ultimate question the material leaves us with is this. Can we figure out a decision-making process today that is most likely to produce outcomes aligned with what people actually want or what humanity genuinely needs?
Even when facing these kinds of potentially huge, unpredictable technological shifts.
That's the challenge. How do we navigate towards a desirable future when the future itself might become unrecognizable?
Wow. Okay, that is definitely a provocative place to end. This has truly been, well, a deep dive.
It really has. We've gone from battlefield robots and accountability
Through critiques of social media, online learning, how we judge information.
to modeling, prediction, and, the potential end of the human era as we know it with the singularity.
Quite the journey. But the common thread, as you said earlier, is this constant need to evaluate, to question, to think critically about the technology shaping our lives.
Absolutely. It's not just about the tech itself, but about our choices regarding it.
So if there's one key takeaway for you listening, it's probably that. Approach technology with a critical, informed perspective.
Don't just be a passive consumer. Ask the hard questions. Why does this exist? Who benefits? What are the trade-offs?
Question the hype, but also recognize the real potential.
Exactly. And maybe the final thought to leave you with is about responsibility.
Our responsibility.
Yeah. What role do we all play, individually and collectively, in shaping this technological future, especially when the long-term consequences are so uncertain, so hard to predict?
What part does your own curiosity, your willingness to engage with these complex questions, play in steering things?
It's a big question, but maybe the most important one.